Welcome everybody to our end of the year NPUC All-Star Roundtable discussion. We brought all of you on because you participated in previous roundtable discussions, and we really appreciated the level of discussion you generated and participated in during those roundtables. You had really unique perspectives and really interesting stuff you were working on, and so we kind of wanted to bring you back to have a who's who of NPUC participants to discuss some of these key issues, but also just get some updates on some of the stuff you've been working on that we talked about before. It looks like, according to my notes here, that we're all on separate roundtables, so there's actually no crossover here. So we'll start with some introductions, just brief about about yourself and what you're working on. And Brian, we'll start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brian Gemmell, I'm the Chief Clean Energy Development Officer at National Grid, covering our New York and New England territories. This is a fairly new role as National Grid has thought about its role in decarbonization in our home states. And my team and myself are particularly focused on areas of proactivity around the transmission network to harness the renewables that are going to be necessary to enable our states to be decarbonized. Secondly, it's with the advent of electrification of fleets. We're focused on highway and large fleet electrification and the impacts to our networks and supporting our customers. And thirdly, with that variability of fuel on the generation side and the increased electrification on the demand side, looking at the play of large storage and bringing those onto the networks. So really been focused on moving those agendas forward around proactivity, having the tough and imagine the world in 2040, 2050 discussions with other peer utilities, regulators, politicians, etc., in trying to address while that looks a fairly long distance away, the reality of decarbonization of the electricity, transportation, and the heating sector remains significant, that we have to address those by having proactive discussions today in order to successfully meet those. So that's what I've been up to and my focus, and I look forward to this panel.
We definitely agree about having those discussions now, and in this case, it's right now. Shaun, I saw you come in. Good to see you again. How about you give us a brief introduction?
Good to see you as well, and thank you for having me. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah. Good.
Okay, just making sure. Everyone looks at the nation. I work for Edison, so we're in New York State. We manage the distribution system of electric, gas, and steam to the customers of the 5 boroughs in New York City and then Westchester County. About 10 million customers in total when you sum it all up between the sectors of residential, multifamily, small to medium business, and then large commercial industrial. My role, I work in the energy efficiency and demand management group to provide some of the incentives and opportunities for our customers to achieve energy savings by incentivizing these technologies within the lighting systems. You have HVAC, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. You have refrigeration, and then gas measures and controls. The programs have evolved where they have been historically 95% of the energy savings have come from lighting to now more sophisticated HVAC measures. And primarily what we're looking to tackle is heat pump and building envelope measures combined for our statewide clean heat effort. We're aware that a large percentage of carbon emissions come from heating load from our building stock in New York City, right? And under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, we have ambitious goals to hit 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 levels by 2050. Those numbers continue to change, right? 40% of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, right? All while delivering the critical benefits to the disadvantaged communities that have not benefited from these transitions in years past. Right, so part of my role again is to bring some of these new technologies to market in an equitable and meaningful manner, while we achieve our state and city set goals.
Thank you. And I'll pass it to Lora next.
Good morning, Lora Anguay with SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. So we're located in Northern California and serve the Sacramento region. Really, I'm our Chief Zero Carbon Officer, and it's a new position for our company. So very similar to Brian, we've got some pretty aggressive goals. Right now, our board of directors adopted a climate emergency declaration at the end of 2020. We've put together a zero carbon plan that aims at reducing carbon emissions achieving zero carbon emissions in our power supply by 2030. We also have a focus of electrification of vehicles and buildings as well to help within decarbonizing the region as well.
Thank you. We're happy to have you on. And last but not least, we have Gray.
Yeah, hi, Gray Byers with Xcel Energy. I work in our business innovation group, and my focus on emerging technology and interest of carbon reduction. So like the others, we have stated goals both on the electric and gas side, and we've really started kind of generation and storage side from an emerging tech standpoint and sort of looking at that 2030, 2050 conversation, and that's extended more across the entire value chain from technologies in each category, including our gas. So we kind of work within a cross-functional group across policy, regulatory, operations, corporate development, et cetera, to kind of bring all this together and understand how to meet these goals from a technology lens, at least on my side.
Thank you, Gray. And I guess for the sake of the recording, Angel, do you want to do a short intro?
Oh, I hate those, but I'll certainly do it. I've met all of you before on previous roundtables. Thank you so much for coming back. I am very excited to have this discussion with you because I really think that you bring not only really selective and awesome vantage points from your different areas around the country, but also a really honest and earnest engagement with the subject matter. And I feel like that's what we need to really move the needle on this really tremendously huge problem. I am Angel Lance. I'm the CEO of Motive Power, management consulting company based in the Bay Area. I'm also the founder of the National Public Utility Council, really driving toward open dialogue, regular conversation, and knowledge sharing and education across the utility industry around decarbonization. How are we working together? What problems are we facing? How do we work together to really tackle the road to net zero and really achieve it, rather than maybe in our disparate worlds talk about it in our own communities? Really working to try to bring the utility industry together as one community and attack the decarbonization issue and road to net zero collectively.
All right, so let's jump into the discussion. Before we hit all the high and minded stuff, I want to just get specific about what's progressed in your decarbonization efforts since the last time you spoke with us. Do you have any new projects or initiatives or important updates to share? Laura, I want to start with you because it's been a minute. We haven't had you on one of these since March.
Yeah, so in April of this year, our board approved our zero carbon plan. So I think it was October of last year when they created the climate emergency declaration, which really instructed us to put together our plan of achieving zero carbon by 2030. That plan was adopted by our board in April. Since that time, we've now in the implementation of that plan. It is a flexible plan. We don't have all the answers, but what we've done so far is we've got studies that are underway that are trying to answer questions. We're participating in research studies as well as doing some on our own. We're participating in the hydrogen study partnered with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Labs, known as the project I think is known as High Blend. And so really to try to understand better the technical barriers of hydrogen within natural gas pipelines. So really hoping to answer the question about equipment and the effects of hydrogen on our equipment. We've been looking and following along upfront carbon capture technology. So really focused on Net Power's Allen Fetvet technology. Really looking at where that's at. There's a 50 megawatt plant, pilot plant in Texas that we're part of the EPRI collaborative demonstration project that's looking at that plant. Right now they're struggling a little bit. It looks like the technology is promising, the design and engineering looks really good, but the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM, that partnership, they're struggling a little bit. So I think it's going to cause some delays with getting that technology to market. And I know obviously with our timelines being 2030, we think it may be a little bit late for us, but we'll continue to pay attention to that technology. We do have in our proven clean technologies section, we're increasing solar and wind production. So we've got a 91 megawatt system that we're adding to wind generation that we're adding to an existing wind farm. That will go into, I think we're looking at commercial operation around 2025. We're signing engineering, procurement, and construction contracts now. We're also looking at, I think it's a 250 megawatt solar power purchase agreement with a 100 megawatt 4-hour battery system for utility scale solar and battery that's going to come online by the end of 2023. And we have another solar storage project, pretty large utility scale project, 350 megawatts with a 170 megawatt 4-hour battery system that'll come on around 2024. So we have looked at our studies to replace 2 of our thermal plants. And with the addition of those renewable resources, our studies are indicating that we can shut down those first 2 power plants that we had targeted to shut down by 2025. So making really good progress. We're completing a study this year on long duration energy storage. So looking forward to getting the results from that study, I think by the beginning of next year. We contracted with Black & Veatch to look at the technologies around long duration energy storage and to come up with viable options. And again, we should have that study completed by the end of this year and have the results at the beginning of next year.
That is impressive, Laura. I have a question. This has been something that's been on my mind, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective. I feel like SMUD has done some really incredible work and is poised to do yet further work and is really driving. It feels as an external person, as somebody on the outside, like SMUD has rallied its whole utility around decarbonization, and that boat has turned in that direction fully. That's my sense of it. My question to you about that is, well, first off, do you think that's accurate? And secondarily, do you think that it's more possible for you to make that full shift because of the size of your utility? Do you feel like you have more latitude or more ability and more nimbleness given your location and your community service?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely correct. Our entire company is kind of marching in this direction. And I think we do have some advantages based on our size. So we're large enough to do some really cool things, but small enough to be able to be nimble still. I think part of that is also our governance model and the way that we're set up. So we have a 7-member board of directors, and we're not part of the city government as well. So we are a municipality, but our budgets are not intertwined with the city or the state. So we are kind of we chart our own course, basically. Our board does for us. And so our board is very much committed to decarbonization, and that's where our direction, our company direction comes from. And yeah, I do think that there's absolute benefits with our size. I also think geographically, we also are located in a really good place. I think we're starting from 50%, over 50% renewables at this point. So we have access to large hydro. In the Northwest, we have some of our own hydro as well. We do have access to wind, which is, again, renewables, I think, are very regional, and we're very well located for this effort.
So luck of the draw in some cases around just geographically speaking, right? Because we don't know.
Yeah, I think that's also, a challenge that's ahead of us as well, because I think being ahead has its challenges. I think, again, we're in a good location, but I think the larger market, obviously moving forward with us would be ideal, because again, that opens up the possibilities of obtaining those renewables from the market as well. If we're too far ahead, I think that's where there's less dependency that we can have on the market, which is not a good place to be. So there's some challenges as well.
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that. That makes sense. Awesome. Thanks for answering that question, because I and checking my gut around how I'm sensing SMUD moving forward. And also really, I'm ultimately next year, I'm going to wrap my more thought around just the fact that a lot of large utilities, many on the panel here and others, they struggle given their size and the breadth of the community that they service. And I feel like I'm happening upon a thought around if we can find a way to kind of like break it up in a smaller way so we can within a big company be able to address different things a little bit more nimbly. Maybe that's an answer to try to expedite our road to net zero. It's just a thought I'm ruminating on, so that's why I was curious about it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Laura. Yeah, it's very impressive, all the stuff SMUD's doing, and there's some specific technologies I'm going to want to come back to, but I want to hear from Gray next, just a bit about how Xcel's been doing since May, how you're coming along with decarbonization projects and investments.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest change since May is, as we probably talked about that time, we have a stated goal for carbon-free electric generation by 2050, but we've since stated a net zero goal for our gas system, which is about 2.5 million customers as well. So, which is an interesting problem to say the least. So we've built out a pretty comprehensive, at least pillared strategy around, across the value chain of gas, from, supply into customer relationships and demand side issues to decarbonize the gas grid as well. So that's been obviously a big change, and you start to see sort of some of the synergies that come into play between the gas system and the electric system as we get into an increasingly decarbonized future. So I think from an integrated strategy perspective, I mean, that's still evolving, but still, as stated previously, there's a lot of questions to be answered. So beyond that, I think from the latter half of this year, I mean, the robustness of putting more meat around framework of how we approach this, and not that we're going to solve 2050 today, but we really need a nimble framework that allows us to understand what questions we're trying to answer, and then how we slot in appropriately to understand what to put where. And so, I think a framework to not only evaluate technologies in interest of our strategies, is important, but then also the execution mechanisms of how do we flow projects, how do we understand what to participate with, and to what extent, how do we receive funding, how do we get de-risking, what are the ways to help the utility segment at large demonstrate these technologies, because it's going to take sort of a diverse set of showing actual grid relationships to these new technologies and or gas system relationships to actually have them proliferate and get to higher order commercialization levels. So all that being said, I think we really put a lot more weight behind participation in research, outlets like Low Carbon Resource Initiative is certainly one, and other outlets that have been mentioned. And then also the participation in projects like our evaluation of different hydrogen projects and how we participate in things like that, including long duration and other durations of storage and things like that. So I think it's just really the end-to-end framework becoming more robust, while also, layering on sort of the gas system and our own, corporate decarbonization as well.
You and Laura both talked about getting involved with hydrogen projects, and that's something that has popped up a bunch this year, but I hadn't really heard about before then. So can you speak to, just for a second, just specifically hydrogen, how that's going, what specifically that's offering as opposed to other kinds of solutions? Because this is something I'm personally interested in.
I can certainly get my perspective on, Laura, maybe you can jump in. I would say maybe that remains to be seen, I guess would be a good way. Exactly where it fits. I mean, I think you're on certainly a very, very strong uptick in the hype cycle of hydrogen, which that's happened quite a bit. I do think behind it. Certainly there's, advantage to hydrogen as being a way for renewable energy to be captured and sort of time shifted by a molecule rather than electron. You can argue sort of trade-offs between, storage or other mechanisms via electrification, or will those take on hydrogen? So I think there's a sort of value chain activity question of do things go electrification or do they go hydrogen? And there's certainly different weights applied to what you're talking about. So I think from a utility perspective, I mean, we have to respectively understand what asset utilization makes the most sense for what purpose, and how do we participate into what depth in that value chain. And I think hydrogen for ourselves, certainly you can blend within combustion turbines and create electricity with lower carbon profiles, as well as blend into the natural gas system to lessen the carbon intensity of the gas system itself. But you can also do things to decarbonize sectors using your existing or new built renewable assets. So, I think there's a lot to be answered, certainly cost and economics, and if it will be the solution for certain portions of industries or economies, but it would be hard not to participate and at least understand and build out some of the expertise or sort of de-risk some of the aspects to understand hydrogen will play, because it likely will play in some regard. I think it's just to what extent.
I think we're looking at hydrogen really around that last 10%. So we know that we can get to about 90% of the way there on using proven clean technologies and renewables. So, but it's that last 10% that I think we're struggling with, and that's where we're looking for answers. Our thermal plants, we look to transitioning them to peaker plants, but we're not sure what the fuel is at this point in time, hydrogen being one of the options. But I think what we're finding, we have looked at our equipment. I think it may require some change out of the equipment. But again, just really looking to answer that question on how do you store hydrogen, and then what the impacts are to the equipment that you have into your pipeline. So we're participating in research. I'm not sure if the cost and timeline will line up with us, but we are participating in the research as well. I do think that there is going to be, and I think Gray touched on this, there's going to be a touch point or synergies between natural gas or the gas providers and electric utilities, because as they look to clean their power supply or their fuel sources, they may end up going the hydrogen direction. And I know that there's work happening in that space. I think there's also work in the electric vehicle space, or in the vehicle decarbonization of vehicles that's either electric or hydrogen as well. I think Toyota's making a big push on hydrogen. And so as those things start to come together, hopefully the price and the availability of that fuel source makes it where it is affordable and is a solution for us.
Actually, I was thinking about the Toyota thing because I used to drive a Lexus, and I wanted my Lexus broke. I needed another one, but they didn't have an electric one because they said they were moving their entire fleet to hydrogen if possible. I was surprised by that. But also, Gray, you said something else that I kind of feel a little dumb about, because it just sort of occurred to me that as we've been talking to utilities across the nation all year, we've been talking to them in terms of their electric decarbonization, not really in terms of their gas portfolio, if they have one. And you just really made me realize that needs to be a part of the conversation ongoing. And I feel like it's the fact that you have folded that in just really sort of drew my attention to have that needs to be much more central in our conversations.
Yeah, and it is a very interesting problem to solve as well. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure in the ground to deliver gas in this country. And natural gas is an extremely effective delivery of energy. So to replace that has, a very high barrier to entry, particularly with natural gas prices where they are. If you look at those comparative to alternative fuels or renewable fuels, you're talking orders of magnitude different from a cost, and, consumers generally, where does that sort of meet in between from the kind of good to the world to that price points are baked in for how we deliver energy. And there's certain requirements and energy intensive processes that, are very hard to replace. So I think, from that perspective, it's very challenging, but, there's a lot of infrastructure that we can leverage that would be, a shame to waste if we can figure out and sort of, understand what the pathways are to do so. So it'd
be great to be able to clean it, like filter natural gas from carbon and still have it work. I mean, in my alternate universe, that's what I'm thinking about.
Which is basically hydrogen, to be honest.
Basically,
it's stripping the carbon and leaving hydrogen. So
awesome.
Thanks for that. All right, so Brian, I want to hear from you about what National Grid is excited about moving forward in decarbonization. I know we just talked in October, so there maybe hasn't been that much movement since then, but what are you looking forward to?
I'll certainly carry on from with Laura and Grace talked about. I'll cover electric and gas. But first and foremost, a major event for us in the last few months was the National Grid was a principal partner at COP. And so that the company with its UK-US operations felt that with that being in the United Kingdom, that it was a major play to have a seat at the organization table and have a much greater access than we would and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. It didn't get the full results that I think everyone perhaps was hoping for, but some of the data around the major countries representing 60-70% of the global GDP have kind of committed to the 1.5 degrees with their decarbonization efforts. So there's a lot of positives to take away, and if we move to the COP over I think the next one is in Egypt, that we continue that progress and the commitment. COVID obviously had an impact with delaying to COP originally. So that was been a major thing for the company being a principal partner. Secondly, getting more into kind of our US electric and gas operations. I'll start with gas as Eddie's carrying on. But yeah, the gas is very much at the forefront. We are a multi-utility, electric and gas, on the transportation, transmission, distribution piece, and that we've been doing a lot of work to scrub what the gas strategy is in terms of the future, and perhaps not in Sacramento or in the middle of the country, but one of the challenges we have from a heat pump perspective is it gets cold here. And there's the whole concept of that, as Gray touched upon, this massive infrastructure with gas and that resilience piece, that when we have all these power outages, we don't have network outages in our gas pipeline. There's also the challenge that the heat pumps don't work when it gets incredibly cold. So therefore, if you're a homeowner, what do you do? So there's that whole, do you need to maintain your gas or oil fuel system to provide that backup when your heat pumps just won't work? It's too cold outside, is it, with the air handling equipment. Then there's we're looking at blend of what can be injected from a renewable gas perspective, from how do you capture and transmit into the pipeline for methane, and how, where can we source that in order to blend to clean up with renewables into the gas pipeline, and looking to the blend from a hydrogen perspective. And then the research that I've read and I've been told internally is that you can get up to 20% hydrogen blend with, and it doesn't have a degrading effect for heating from your appliances in the home for cooking. So there's a way to clean up the gas network. So those are some of the issues. And the lastly, and I'm sure Shaun, as it's relevant to him, if you think of the buildings that exist today, one of the revelations is that with large metropolitan aged cities, that there's the fact that a lot of the buildings, it's not going to be practical to provide all electric or heat pump type heating because of the age, the design, etc. of the building. So that completely removal of more traditional heating things practically has some challenges. So that was just a little bit of some of the things that we are deliberating on, but we do, with all our analysis, with our 2040, 2050 analysis, with all of those kind of things in mind on the gas side, there is a pathway from our point to decarbonizing, hitting those net zero goals, embracing that, but seeing gas as relevant, and just the practicality of the energy that would be consumed on the heating sector to get to 100% electric would kind of triple the number of renewables you would need, assuming the wind was blowing and the sun was shining in the winter, to offset that gas demand for heating, as if it was to translate it into all electric heating. So, there's the bill impacts that have to be borne. On the electric piece, since we last spoke, a significant milestone was the filing that we, National Grid, made on November 8th, which is the first phase of our program of projects for New York to meet its 2030 goal. We've done a suite of projects, as Con Ed has also done for theirs, one of the transmission owners in New York. There was a pragmatic view to where the renewables are going to be across the state: offshore wind, land-based solar, land-based wind, etc. And then from our footprint upstate, for the 2030 goals, that we were going to have to design and proactively address our network to accommodate 10 gigawatts of incremental renewables. So we've come up with plans, and we've filed the phase 1 of those on our rate filing that'll be good for the next 3-4 years for that first phase. And we're now working on the second phase. But that's an incremental, you know, $2.5+ billion of transmission projects that will give the connectability for 10 gigawatts of renewables, and it would increase export capabilities by 3.5 gigawatts. That was the exam question that we were posed in line with the state goals to achieve that. So that was a major for us to get that first phase, because 2030 isn't far away, and there's a significant investment. So that's going to be required to accommodate that proactively, and that will tell the developers, here are the regions, much like they did in Texas and with Tehachapi, we're identifying renewable energy zones where the transmission will be, and declaration of the spare capacity that the upgrades will address, and then giving signals to the generators. So that was a one. So we're obviously working on the next suite, which will get us to 2030 and beyond. But the just two other topics that Angel, that you bring up with the gas. I think it's important that we recognize with the decarbonization goals, there's two other issues that I think are relevant. One is going to be in workforce development. From Sacramento to Xcel, Zpryme to New York, the current market and resource pool is kind of on the steady state that we have today. But if we are going to go 2-3 times that with whether it be heat pump installation, whether it be solar panel installation, whether it be offshore wind, whether it be whatever, and over into the aging workforce, where are the people going to come from to do all this work, install it? So that's one. And then the second one, with we have to maintain the reliability of the network through construction. So outages in coordination with our control centers, with higher frequency and storms and the like, more disruptive. So two things to add to your list is outage management and resource management going into the future.
Resource management meaning workforce development and resources.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm
electricians, matting contractors, equipment operators. It's the bread and butter. It's the people that put stuff in the air, put stuff in the ground, that work in our, and doing installations in our homes.
Yeah, I remember in our last conversation, Brian, you had mentioned not something similar around how workforce really travels with technology and really travels along this road to net zero, both positively and negatively, right? Depending on how things are shifting. That stuck with me since our original conversation, and I've given it a tremendous amount of thought in terms of how we can represent really the shift of economy, right? Which ultimately then supplies communities and shifts them or doesn't, right? So I appreciate that thought process, and I think that as we talk about the net zero train, we're really focused so much on how we achieve it in technology, often losing sight of the fact that we need people to be a huge part of that process to get there.
Yeah, we're doing a partnership development in our downstate New York for a gas business, with trying to train in specific communities those that can install, have the capability to install heat pumps. Just helping to develop a local workforce in downstate for a need that's coming, with those that are trying to install heat pumps. So again, working collaboratively with local businesses for very worthy causes.
That's what I love about this group of people, because I cannot wait to also hear about what Shaun is doing. I think magically, and I feel like this is sort of magic, the four of you, with one person who wasn't able to join us today, she's on maternity leave, really represent not only the country as a whole, but also really specific vantage points that all collectively come together, right? And it just sort of worked out that way. And I think it's so cool.
Yeah, and with that, we'll pass it to Shaun. Excited to hear about what you're up to, especially because you come at this from an accessibility perspective with the programs you manage. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
I mean, I just want to start by saying that I really value everything that the other panelists, Laura, Gray, and Brian had mentioned, and it's this, we're in the same sector, but it's this cross-sector collaboration that's needed to be successful. I come from the union. My background at Edison, I started almost 15 years ago. Time flies, but my first job was as an electrician in the union, building traditional substations, working in the power gen stations, upgrading the infrastructure, responding to emergency response efforts like Hurricane Sandy, replacing the transformer that blew up with a new transformer, and then installing floodgates and storm hardening measures. So I understand the value of having that asset that put in the ground. You know what you're getting from it. Right now, there's a lot of ambiguity and there's more variability with what we're trying to accomplish. Right? Leaning on our customer base to really install these energy efficient technologies, right? Leaning on them to do the right thing and leaning on policy to make the right decisions. Right. So hearing from this team, we're facing the same challenges and really conducting the same research and efforts. Right. I'll start with Canada's clean energy commitment. Gray, you mentioned something about pillars. We have our own pillars that we set forth. With pillar number one being build the grid of the future. Right. We're building a resilient 22nd century electric grid to deliver 100% clean energy by 2040. That's not an easy task. Brian, you mentioned part of it being offshore wind. We're facilitating 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind, including new substations, local transmission projects, and peak demand reduction strategies. Right, so that's really on the front of our minds for that first pillar of this energy transition. Pillar two, empower all customers to meet climate goals. Right, we're investing aggressively $1.5 billion in energy efficiency and building electrification by 2025. Right, that's our interim goal, and tripling energy efficiency by 2030. Right, this is all an effort to be on the correct path to hit that 80 by 50, 40 by 30 goal set forth by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Pillar number three, as aforementioned by the other panelists, we need to reimagine our gas system. Right, decarbonizing and reducing the utilization of natural gas, and explore new ways to use our existing infrastructure to serve our customers' future needs. So, I mean, there's a lot going on there. A short distance from New York State is Pennsylvania. And recently, one of the utilities I saw on their website incentivizing customers to switch from electric heating to gas heating, right? Because they have a lot of supply of gas, and it's when you talk about cost, it's more favorable. Whereas here in New York State, we're going the opposite direction with this clean heat program that we have, which is a joint utility, national grid included, driving the customers to adopt mini splits and other cold climate heat pumps to really heat their systems in the winter, right? So providing customers with those heating options, right? Non-pipeline solutions programs, clean energy alternatives with a continuous focus on capital investments and public safety, right? Because that's always been a main concern of ours. Pillar number four, we need to lead by example, right? So lead by reducing our own company's footprint, our carbon footprint, right? We have reduced about 85% of our scope 1 emissions through our steam system, our district steam system, which is, I think, the largest in the world, with energy efficiency, some low carbon fuels, electrification of boilers, and some carbon capture and sequestration that's on the horizon. And we also have hydrogen in the plans, as others have mentioned during this call. And on the EV side, we're electrifying our light duty vehicle fleet by 100% by 2035, right? And 80% by 2030. If you think about what we do on a day-to-day basis, transportation is an integral part of us serving our community and our customers, right? In a reliable and safe manner. Oftentimes, to keep our own employees safe, they have to keep the vehicles running in the winter to keep warm, or to keep some of the devices powered when they're working on it. So that conversion to electrify our fleet is going to be monumental for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the heat island index within the city, right? And then pillar five is partnering with our stakeholders. I think that this is one of the key elements to success across the board, right? We need to enhance our collaboration with our customers and stakeholders to improve the quality of life, in the neighborhoods that we serve, right? And with a specific focus on the disadvantaged communities. One thing that stands out to me, Brian, I'm not sure if you're working with NYSERDA on any of this workforce development training, but I myself saw that gap in the talent in us trying to get to these decarbonization efforts for our workforce and our communities, right? And we designed alongside my implementation contractor, who's World Energy Solutions. We got some sort of students and representation from Green City Forest, and we launched what's called the Clean Energy Academy. So NYSERDA has program opportunity notices listed on their website to help fund and support workforce development with a mandate that for new hires, 50%, right? Not one, not two, 50% of the participants must come from disadvantaged communities or priority populations, right? Which really speaks to the commitment there. They're investing $36.5 million in this workforce development track. And to date, we had 7 applications approved and several cohorts that have taken place. The first initial cohort took place last year. It was focused on your basic energy efficiency technology, so lighting, refrigeration, HVAC. The second track was focused on thermodynamics and envelope, really heat pump technology. So we launched that one. And we're continuing to expand on the sort of criteria, the development of this programming. Since this inception, which was again last year, it was in person. We had to pivot because of the pandemic to a virtual classroom setting, but we were able to create jobs for over 80 people, like brand new work, brand new jobs. And for the incumbent workers, they're getting promoted into the clean energy space with their respective companies. So it really speaks to the commitment and the value. We really expanded our partners and our partnerships through City College, NYIT, so the academic institutions to help us with the curriculum development, Energy EDC to help with making sure that it's all equitable. We have advisors, we have capstone advisors. One of our MWBE contractors really facilitates capstones so some of these students can volunteer with the startup and really bring a new technology to the forefront of our programming. And, really just making sure that all voices are heard, right? It's very transparent, right? Equitable and mutually beneficial across the board, right? So under the structure of our clean energy commitment, we've been able to accomplish really good things. And we've identified that boilers and furnaces and hot water heaters account for 40% of the city's carbon, right? That's more than the total emissions from electricity citywide. If you don't have just these good programming set in place, you have laws or policy, right? So in New York City rather, because it's a city policy, we have Local Law 97, which requires most buildings over 25,000 square feet to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by a permissible limit, or they'll be fined starting in 2024. Local Law 33, which requires building owners 25,000 square feet and above as well to obtain a building energy efficiency rating label, similar to what you'll see in a restaurant, the A, B, C, D rating, and then a score associated with that building's energy performance. And just recently, there's a New York City bill that just passed requiring new buildings, so new construction buildings, shorter than 7 stories to be all electric by 2024, January 1st, right? The thinking there is, the residential space, the small multifamily buildings, 7 stories and below, are a little bit easier to electrify, but the heating and cooling needs are just as impactful to the environment. And one such project that I'm currently working on that is new. I think that was the last part of the question, Dylan. It's a shark wastewater recovery system, right? So the product is first of its kind in the HVAC market. It's a self-contained heat pump that is specially designed to direct the expansion through a heat exchanger and really extract the thermal energy from the building's wastewater for domestic hot water heating. And then some of the wastewater sources are black and gray water from the building, sanitary sewers and lift stations with treatment centers, right? So it bundles the cooling capacity for simultaneous domestic hot water production and air conditioning. So currently working with a well-known hotel in Manhattan to deploy this technology, and EPRI has backed the technology, as well as the Canadian government, it's a Canadian company, right? And they're receiving incentives from my program and other stakeholders to really see if we could bring this product to the market. So those are some of the new things that I've been working on and how our company is envisioning our decarbonization efforts. Obviously, there are a lot of moving pieces here and a lot of groups and organizations within my company that are working on these simultaneously, but a lot of alignment and similarities across what I've heard today from the other panelists.
Encouraging, isn't it?
And Angel, to your comment about magic, I mean, all of this climate change and what we call now climate mobilization. It's all really like science fiction. So we need some magic to make it happen, right?
Well, I think we have that. I think we have that magic here in that big brains, big hearts, and and unstoppable determination ultimately will lead to us being able to actually ask the harder questions and be upfront about what challenges we're facing, and not political, but really just, man, this is going to work if we can do this. We're stuck here, and we got to, if we really just authentically approach the problem, as I think this group of panelists does, and will continue to do within your respective organizations.
And I'm going to be really interested to see how that water heating program you talked about at the end there, how that all works out, because the way you described it sounds really interesting. So yeah, thank you for catching us up on what you've been up to. As a piece of context, I just wanted to show off a pair of interesting graphics for this particular All Stars panel. We're covering quite a lot here. We got some East Coast, we got some West Coast, we got some Midwest, the Heartland, and the South as well. And then over the course of the year, we've had representatives from a lot of different places. Would love to have more states filled in on this map by this time next year, but really excited the number of different perspectives that have been brought here. So this is just some nice context on where we're all coming from, and just excited to continue on.
When we originally started this conversation amongst utilities across the U.S., folks were genuinely interested and got involved and wanted to have open discussion around what's going on in their space, what unique challenges are they facing, and share those amongst each other. But as the year went on, and we garnered more participation from different groups across the country, the level of knowledge sharing and education that changed hands as a result of us simply having this discussion on a every other month basis, I think is really the astounding element, right? Where folks afterwards get off on other calls to talk about different, well, how'd you guys do that? And what about that? And the level of awareness around the utility industry as a whole, after speaking with each other regularly on the subject matter, I think is helping to expedite and escalate our industry's answer to climate change, and to decarbonization. So I'm encouraged by that. And I think next year, filling in the rest of those states will actually not be a tall order, but really what we are able to transfer amongst each other across these different states will be the general focus.
Yes, and I'm excited to see. Yeah, I'm just excited to see what more there is to learn, because there's at least from my perspective, there's definitely a lot more I have to learn, and I'm excited to hear that from all these different perspectives. And we're talking about we're coming in here at the end of the year, so, and a lot happened in terms of big decarbonization news that everyone's heard about. There's COP26. There's all that like federal infrastructure money that's coming down, with maybe some more on the horizon. And then as we just got done talking about, there's been a lot of movement in your specific organizations at that level. So, but I just want to ask, from your perspective, what have been some of the key themes or trends in decarbonization that you watched closely in 2021? And do you think that we're beginning to set ourselves up well for the goals we've put on ourselves?
From my backyard perspective, there's been a tremendous focus on the renewable generation. However, there's the recognition that only gets so far. And then there's the electrification around the transportation and the heating sector. and the education around the capacity factor for renewables relative to grid resilience, which then, and it also ties back to certainly in the Northeast, there needs to be a narrative around the holistic energy planning, because it's not just an electric discussion for reasons we've talked about earlier. So that would be my kind of reflection. The debate has really moved on. It's more than renewables. It's not just an electric discussion. And we need to be thinking about, much broader operational resilience moving forward with the greater dependency on renewables. So that'd be my short summary, Dylan.
Yeah, those are all really important. Gray, what are you taking a look at? What are you thinking about this year?
Yeah, I would agree with Brian. I mean, I would call that kind of the narrative change around, what is the actual problem? I think there has been an easy build a bunch of renewables, and it's much more complex than that. So I think that combined with, for us, some of the way the direction is going, momentum, I guess, from a policy and certainly local jurisdictions, but much more broadly, the enablement factors. So, a lot of this, there's significant green premiums, and we don't really have time to wait. And we have, largely chicken and egg problems where, there's not demand to create the commercialization and scale for promised costs. So you kind of have to spread that across, multiple entities with, multiple forms of either, capital contribution and or, kind of buying that down. So I think that is, good and a supportive nature of actually being able to demonstrate some of these projects and really getting serious about doing just that, is showing, there's actually action to be had today to solve these problems. I think all those sort of narratives are kind of coming together where there's, increased seriousness of how we kind of really participate in these arenas and each kind of take our respective category and show what needs to be done, at least in theory, and actually put some things on the ground to prove that they either work or they don't. And so we can start to really solve this problem, because, as was mentioned earlier, the conversation has to start now, and there's no clear answer, which makes for an intriguing problem, but it means there needs to be a diversity of approach to solve it, which is inherently expensive. So.
Do you feel, Gray, that, just from hearing y'all speak today, I get the sense that that there is a new sense of urgency within the utility industry that is prevalent. Is that a fair statement? Would you want to challenge that?
I think I would say I'm proud from an Xcel perspective that I think we stated goals early and we've been serious about it. I think there's an urgency in the support mechanisms and the more communal urgency that is much more supportive of actually doing action and maybe accepting some of the trade-offs that are required for the decarbonization journey. So I would say yes, in that we want to do our part, but also just the sort of, extension of the stakeholder network. Definitely it is coming to play, and particularly when, local government all the way up to federal government is starting to put momentum about it. That's really what spurs that change. And, everybody points to, the ways that solar and wind proliferated, it worked. And there needs to be, sort of that next wave of technologies that play their role in closing out the gap. And hopefully we're in the start of a similar wave.
It's a great point. And I'm glad you pulled that out to that context, because it's not just maybe a renewed or a more urgent sense from the utility who have been working steadfastly in this regard, but from your communities and also and stakeholders at large. And that really helps drive everything.
And utilities can be urgent, but at the end of the day, it's, at the beginning of this, it's kind of, okay, we want to be carbon free, but what do we do? And how does that not, have detrimental impact on ratepayers in the environments today? So there's a lot more to the story where we can push all we want, but it's a multifaceted problem that requires lots of momentum and lots of support. And I think that's where you're starting to see that shift that will be supportive of not only the goals, but lessening the burden of doing so.
Lora, I'm interested in your perspective on this year, especially as SMUD in the previous in October 2020 got more aggressive with their goals. And so I'm curious overall how doing that has affected your perspective on the year in decarbonization.
I agree with everything Brian and Gray just said. I do think, again, there's challenges with kind of jumping ahead and pushing 2030 and really the goal being absolute zero by 2030. I think that the key thing for us, though, and Gray just touched on this perfectly, is there's a lot of impact to that, right? And there's some consequences there if you do it in the wrong way. And there's the cost to our consumers, to our customers, our community. And I think part of the promise that we made was similar to what Shaun touched on, which is the no community left behind and making sure that we're doing this in a way that's affordable for all. And then also as we start to see an increase in the renewable technologies, that there's workforce development that happens along with that in our underserved communities. So I think there's a lot of momentum at this point. I think that kind of putting the stake in the ground has caused a lot of momentum as well. But I do think that some of the things that we're looking at, and again, Brian touched on it perfectly, is that we don't think renewables is the 100% answer. I don't think we can get there with just renewables. And so there has to be something else that emerges. I think long duration energy storage is one that we're looking at. Battery storage 4-hour systems don't get you overnight, and they don't get you the weeks of fog and overcast that we have in the Sacramento Valley or in California in the Valley here. And so there has to be another solution that emerges. I'm not sure what that is, not sure what it looks like, but I think, again, having that hard deadline that was set and not knowing all the answers and admitting to that, I think is creating some momentum. And so, but I think it's also important to note that we're not going to get there at all costs, right? So there's some things that we cannot sacrifice, and that's reliability and affordability for our customers.
That's the first time, I think, in one of these that someone's talked about the need for a solution that doesn't exist yet, which, or at the very least, is not tested. So I think that's something that I'm definitely interested in keeping an eye on. One thing, we're talking a lot about how there's momentum, but there's a way to we're navigating the way to do it without causing an undue burden on customers. From the customer side, Shaun, you're working a lot with the housing aspect of it, but also a lot of just particular CNI customer innovation and partnership. So from that perspective, how is the discussion moving forward with your stakeholders?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I agree with everything that the other panelists said on the last question, but we really think that educating them is going to be a key to success, right? So engaging our partners. I think Urban Green Council is a really good partner of ours here in New York City. We have Energy Star and Zpryme is another outlet that really gets the messaging out to the customers in the community. Because there's a lot going on. Sometimes it's confusing even for people in the field to understand and digest. Try putting that in front of the different types of business owners in any one of our cities, right? A decade ago, we're asking them all to convert from fuel oil to natural gas. Now we're asking them to convert from natural gas to building electrification. Building that trust between them. We need our community-based organizations to really be keen to understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. We need our business improvement districts, our chambers of commerce, right? Our universities, right? That are really going out and teaching and educating not only our customers, but the contractors that provide the solutions, right? Of why this is important and the economic value that is available to them, both monetarily and on the health benefits. Right? A lot of the health concerns, the indoor air quality, and just the air quality in general have come to the forefront. So these technologies that we're deploying have not only been resilient in helping us with our electric needs, but the byproduct is sustainable, right? And I think that when you put them all together, then you make the business case for these products to move forward, right? Whereas before you would only consider just the cost, But now you have the benefit for accessibility, right? For having a cell phone that could control temperature zones within your office space to make sure all of your employees are comfortable, right? Or making sure that when you're away from the home, you don't have to run your air conditioner all day during a summer day to keep your dog cool. You could actually control it with the touch of a button on your smartphone. So as we embark on the fourth industrial revolution to a smart city, right, these technologies are becoming more and more in demand, right? Customers want them, right? And then again, for us, we're looking at the byproduct, which is a reduction in carbon emissions if they don't necessarily value that as much as we do, right? And a reduction in the energy cost burden to deliver these sources to them.
The other part I would make with regard to customers, building on the affordability piece we talked about with the other Laura and Gray talked about that. The other piece that we are critical to is not our kind of individual consumers, it's our corporate clients. Just as we have ambition as utilities to, we've heard it from the others, to 2030, 2035 with our operations, we are critical to corporations meeting their climate targets and business goals that they've set themselves. So yes, we've got the affordability of the individual, but we've got the corporate customers we support the other, that we are critical to them also.
There's been a series of panels that have been happening throughout the year with a variety of different mega corporations in our country and their interface with the utility industry, particularly in well, maybe not particularly, but in my backyard in California with Silicon Valley and some of the big tech groups, you know, generating their own energy and finding ways to report on that in ways that work for their net zero goals of their own, in addition to their communities, because they also have communities that they serve and that. So that juxtaposition of different industries with the utility space toward net zero is an interesting crossroads and really a great place for collaboration, maybe to a whole new level, but in terms of technology, idea generation, just, you know, just different ways of looking at this problem.
Correct.
So looking forward a bit, you know, we put out, we put out these regular benchmarking surveys, and you know, we're trying to look at data to get a broader picture of of decarbonization efforts across the country. So I'm curious, in the coming year, in 2022, what's something that you would want us to be tracking, to be including in this data collection, to that you think would help either spark good discussion or help paint a picture of how well we're actually doing in decarbonization? What are you looking for in 2022?
Well, I mean, there's things that we're tracking with, you know, number of charge points, you know, heat pump, energy efficiency, demand response, you know, various things like that. And so, you know, we'll continue to monitor them. But I think from a tracking in 22, first and foremost, we have to walk the talk. So we have to make sure that we are on our track to our decarbonization, our own goals, such that we're defendable and credible externally. Importantly, you know, we have to deliver for our customers. And so that important that we are meeting all our capital programs and support of our networks and our customers. So we've got to meet all of our internal you know, deliverabilities from you know, a stakeholder. You know, storm response, that's another one that, you know, we just came out of a storm, and I know it was nothing as horrific as it was in the central part of the country, but you know, several 100,000 customers out for multiple days is not a good thing in winter. But that was the reality we had in upstate New York this week, or over the weekend. So there's a multitude of, you know, more traditional utility things, but it's the I think that the key is monitoring, are we on the right glide paths? And within that, I said plural because there's the gas, there's the electric, the electrification, there's the connection to renewables. All of these things contribute towards the paths that we are collectively on in our respective states, that are the glide paths on track with the 2025, the 2030, because it's not linear. We can see where the EV new car sales are today. In 3 years' time, there's going to be a plethora of then used electric vehicles in the market for those that perhaps can't afford a brand new car. So there's multiple things at play, and is the aggregate of the glide paths progressing as planned? I think that's an critical one, because we say in National Grid that this current decade is a critical decade to 2040, 2050. If we don't get that glide path and the revving of the engines, the momentum, the inertia, whatever you want to call it, in all of those fronts, whether it be policy, legislation, construction, planning, there's all those different elements, because all of these elements, from heating, transportation, and generation, are all at play. So the glide paths meeting expectations.
Thank you for that. I'll pass it to Lora next. What are some metrics or trends that you're interested in 2022?
So I think internally we're monitoring, again, reliability and affordability, and making sure that we're meeting those commitments to our customers as we move forward. I think it's also important that we monitor just kind of where our customers are at, because I don't know that they're on the same journey with us at this point, and it's important that they do get on the journey with us. I think we don't want to seem that we're not listening or understanding the issues that they may be going through. I know COVID's had a huge impact on our economy. I'm sure it's across the nation as well. So we're seeing a lot of customers that are really struggling to pay their bills. So it's important that we are not tone deaf to the issues that they're facing as we move forward. I think externally, some of the things that we're following, again, are long duration energy storage, and it's really understanding what technologies are emerging to meet that last 10% or 20%, depending on your region and the availability of renewables that you have. And so it's really the watching and paying attention to those emerging technologies that could provide the solution to that remaining percentage in order to serve our load.
Thank you. And Shaun, what about you?
Yeah, I'm interested. I mean, listen, our goals keep changing year over year, but I am interested to see what the customer's journey is as well. I agree with Laura on that one. As we start to completely roll out, which we have already, this clean heat program, to see how many customers are willing to decommission their heating system in the winter and rely on this new technology that they may not have the same amount of confidence in. I think that is going to be a testament to whether we're successful in this space or not. When you look at Con Edison, pardon me, sorry, we are a summer peaking system, meaning that we plan for our system to be able to handle the hottest days of the summer, right, without any outages or any sort of any issues, right? When you look at the winter months right now, we have about 40% of room for growth between a peak winter and summer demand. And as we all know, our system could perform a lot better in the cold weather, so we could provide even more energy during the winter months because the system is cool, so it runs optimally, right? So the growth is definitely, at least in New York State, on electrifying the heating load, right? To kind of, as a first step to reducing our carbon footprint, while we look to advance sort of technologies that, as Laura mentioned, maybe not be here yet, right? Or energy storage systems that have a longer duration of storage, some of those other technologies. But I would want to track, because the CLCPA, the goals came and then they increased and then they increased, right? Policies keep coming left and right? They keep changing and becoming more aggressive. And we have to consider the customer's journey, like how are they going to react to all of these changes from their perspective and what their needs are.
Thank you. And Gray, what are you tracking or would be interested to see someone track in 2022?
Yeah, my tracking, as I kind of said in my intro, is largely focused on emerging technologies. So it's, I think for me, there's sort of these incremental changes that's shaving, right? So building a lot of renewables is going to hit a wall. Shaving demand is going to hit a wall. And it's sort of, what's that step change? new technologies or new approaches or new customer relationships, and like the the heat exchanger idea that Shaun's talking about, things like that that are really moving the needle, where when those walls are hit on technology, what is potential proliferation to reach that next plateau. Those are kind of the interesting portions for me. And then obviously there's a distribution of those activities as Shaun described. We have them, I'm sure Lora has them, of all kinds of things that are good ideas, but what are they going to actually lead to, and understanding what those look like across the board and what might be a good thing to follow on and or try yourself is interesting. And I think weave within that, to kind of pile on to Shaun and Laura's point, is I think the customer sentiment is extremely important. That's not something I personally track, but having that touch utilities and sort of as a lead into your point on the tech companies, the relationship to the customer is going to change drastically, both from the way they interact with their energy, but also their view on some of these programs or what the utility is doing, or just the decarbonization journey in general. So, knowing their experience in some of these programs and how they view the results and or their relationship to it, I think is something interesting, and gives, a little more, it gives us better depth or in tuneness to the customer to understand how to approach them as these offerings and situations become more complex.
You did mention, emerging technologies. Just, are there any specific ones that you're interested in that we haven't already talked about, like hydrogen and heating?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's, largely what we've kind of boiled it down to is long duration storage is obviously going to play, well, no, I shouldn't say obviously, but our view is a critical aspect. You kind of have medium to long duration storage that I think, as Laura's mentioned, is not served and impossible to serve with the 4-hour paradigm that exists today from a cost perspective, and outlier events, as well as those extended needs, where you kind of look at existing carbon resource, what their load profile is, what the duration of gaps historically that they've had to cater. That's your bogey, and that's what you're looking for to solve, and that's very challenging. But the only way to firm up renewables to where they're usable in these sort of events that have plagued certain pockets of the country. So long duration storage, obviously hydrogen, as I said, that's become a big focal point to understand how to participate with that. I think anybody, I know this is sort of a mixed topic, but increasingly nuclear seems to have a hand to play. I know that's a challenging subject generally, so I'll just sort of leave it there, but small modular certainly has an interesting way to support a big portion of this carbon-free base load that can take a lot of the burden off of other technologies that might not be ready and or might not exist. So those are the main ones on the generation side. Then obviously, there's a variety of things, on the transmission and distribution and customer side that are also of interest, but more on the sort of consumer electronics side, more than long cycle generational technologies.
A sidebar question. Maybe you guys do this all over the place, but do you poll your customers on their sentiment on how it is that they feel about your utilities moving into decarbonization efforts?
I could take that. Yeah, we send general surveys out, but we have more intimate market research discussions with our customers, and not only with our customers, with our contractors as well, and customers from all sector types, so multifamily, small business, large commercial, industrial, and residential, to really see exactly what their focus is on. And it varies, right? It varies based on the sector type and then the location of where they are. A lot of our customers in the borough of Manhattan don't have access to a solar panel because it's so densely populated. But if you go out to the outer boroughs, there's more space on their roofs for them to install some of these types of equipment, right? The same thing on the heat pump side. If you're looking at a geothermal heat pump, you need a lot of land mass and space to install and see the benefits of that technology. Whereas in Manhattan, where it's densely populated, they don't necessarily have access to that offering, right? So we engage our market research team often to really put together a good dialogue across the sectors to get an understanding. And then once we learn, we can plan to make sure our programs cater to them all and meet them where they are. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to kind of meet the low to moderate income community differently than the large commercial industrial community, right? It's
Right.
very different than the small to medium business community, as well as the multifamily. They all have different goals and needs and ways to engage them. So we're frequently testing out our communication with them, right? And trying to relate to their needs to help us meet our goals.
So that sounded regular, and maybe you're trending, like you're doing analysis trend-wise.
That's correct.
Cool. And Laura, does SMUD do that as well?
Yeah, we do a lot of market research as well, and we also do a lot of community outreach and customer meetings, community meetings as we make changes, especially something as big as our 2030 plan. I think we held, I don't even want to quote the numbers, but we held numerous meetings with our stakeholders. I think the challenge, though, especially on those meetings, is around 2030 and decarbonization, we may be attracting certain customer groups and not others. And I think being able to, and Shaun just touched on it, but being able to meet our communities where they're at, because it's a little bit different for those that are maybe working two jobs, that cannot attend community meetings, have other things going on. And so you're hearing from possibly, one segment of your customers and not all of them. And I think that's a challenge that we're working through. Again, using market segmentation and market information, but I think it's important that we also hear from customers that we don't typically hear from. So trying to figure out how we do that is going to be a good path forward.
It's a huge point, Laura. When I was working 3 jobs, there's no way I would have gone to a utility town hall. Like, there's just no way. Like, I was very busy. Gray, I assume that it's probably the same across all the boards, right? The reason I asked the question was that everybody mentioned that one of the things that you'd really like to hear more about in 2022 is your customer's perspective, is customer response, and customer being the customers at large, like all of the communities. And I had to imagine that you guys had mechanisms to be driving, some research in that way. Is there something on top of that because we also touched a little bit about education, and I think, Shaun, you were focused on that to some degree, that education across the board in terms of your stakeholder set maybe could move the needle. Just trying to juxtapose those two concepts and make sure that I understand what would be useful in 2022.
I think that's what I was kind of trying to allude to, I guess, as things get more complex. It is that particular to that education cycle. So, I mean, we think about it, it's like, we're going to blend hydrogen into your system, which will go straight into your house, like that's it. It's not necessarily trivial, while safe, and the utility will do it correctly. And there's a lot of things to make sure that happens. There's a big barrier on an individual basis, particularly with the history of hydrogen. This is just an example. But you have to overcome a pretty big communal hurdle to get understanding and not just do on to the community and be in collaboration with them. So I think, sentiment leads to, effective, education channels, and vice versa. So that's really what I was getting at. And I think as you get more diversity in programs, like, as more renewable fuels come in, as more ways to manage the household, as more data becomes available, particular to us, like with smart meters and, more intelligence on the edge and things like that. I mean, you're going to have way more complex and different relationships, and the education's into how to effectively relate to that, what to choose to do, and really know. I mean, right now it's hard. I mean, most people can barely tell you what the cost of a kilowatt hour is. They just know generally what their bill is, and they want that bill to stay about the same, and they want their lights to be on. So as you get into these much more complex environments, it's quite the hurdle, both to understand where they're at positionally with their own, mentality, as well as how they view, but also then what should they do to participate in this ecosystem and this sort of next generation of energy consumption, if at all. So that's, I think two important sides to pretty much the same coin.
I think that's so huge. If you had told me, when you tell me, Angel, I'm gonna start pumping hydrogen into your house, I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about that. I'm gonna, I have children. I'm thinking, is that safe? Right? Of course, it's probably safe, but there's a fear factor. You mentioned nuclear. Everyone's afraid to talk about that. I live in California. I think you get strung up if you say the word nuclear. And I have my personal beliefs about how it's a fantastic option. But there's this huge fear factor and it's a psychosis really around different new things that are coming down the line. So I'm capturing that education to the community. I would even take a step back, not just in maybe new science like you're describing or new technology, but even just as far as what a utility does, like in some base level education around the utility industry as a whole. Because you said people don't know like the cost of a kilowatt hour. I don't know the cost of a kilowatt hour, and I work with utilities a lot for like 20 years. So I think it's probably commonplace.
You know, the extent of the relationship is basically once you have to call, which usually means your lights are off. So it's, you know, it's an assumed thing in this country, and yet it's such an important part of the economy, every bit of the economy. That yeah, the broad-based education into specifics would be maybe not wanted on every angle, but I think there's a lot of you know, it's just something that's assumed that is getting much more complex. So
yeah, great. I was going to touch on a similar topic because you know, you have to wonder why we're here, right? You know, the traditional grid was one-dimensional. It's generation, goes through the transmission distribution system to our end user, and that's it. But now with the new grid, it's a two-way flow of electricity, right? So our customers are, not that they weren't important before, but they're even more important now, right? The understanding is even more important now than ever because we're relying on them to help us manage this complex system that hasn't changed for generations. And communicating that to them in a less technical way than it actually is, right? Is challenging at times. We get into all of our acronyms. We get into these rabbit holes of centralized versus decentralized systems and all these new technologies, and we kind of forget that, you know, this isn't common language or understanding for your average customer, not even for your average utility worker, right? Depending on what part of the business they work in, right? So it's very new to us as well. Right, but we're moving away from that transaction, right, where the customer only thinks about us when the power is off, to more of like that software as a service provider, right, where they have these options and we're helping them along that path while still providing safe and reliable energy to all of our customers and the municipalities that we live in.
You just blew my mind, Shaun. I'm thinking back to a year ago. I'm going to go find this. I'm going to hunt you down and send it to you. I was whiteboarding in one of my nerd moments by myself in my office, and I drew this whole thing about a software licensing model for energy. And I'd be so curious for your review to see if you just thought I was a nut job, which it's possible, but it's
not at all.
Well, and I will say, what you talked about, Shaun, it kind of leads into the last thing I want to talk about. I know we're up against time, but like, you know, in between all these things we do, you know, me and Angel are always talking about what lessons we're learning out of this sort of thing. But you know, one thing we keep coming back to is that, you know, the goals are moving, which is good. Like what SMUD's done is pretty impressive. But you know, we're still pretty much not where we need to be in terms of, you know, the 1.5 degree or 2 degree like thresholds that are really important for the global climate change discussion and averting catastrophe. And so I'm just sort of curious what you think would realistically need a change overall so that we could make goals nationwide a bit more aggressive. Is it that customer sentiment needs to change like you were talking about? Do we need like more public funding to shoulder the burden? Is there a regulatory aspect to it? Do we just need to completely rethink the utility business model on the whole? Like what would actually have to change for us to be able to sort of do our part more as a nation?
Yeah, I think we need to move from stakeholder engagement to stakeholder mobilization, right? Where you have these different sectors. You have the public sector, you have the private sector, then you have the civil service, right? And each of our sectors have different priorities, competing priorities at times, and we're not really speaking the same language. I'll narrow it down to just my program, utility energy efficiency program. Regulated utility, we focus on energy savings calculations from what's called the New York State Technical Resource Manual. And there's technical resource manuals all across the nation, right, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. Our engineers in the field, they focus on ASHRAE level standards to estimate savings. Then you have contractors that are focused on baseline code requirements. They're all speaking different languages, but similar goals, right? So making that connection across all stakeholders, right, to mobilize these efforts, right, to be inclusive of the environmental justice zones, to be inclusive of what our customers' needs are, to be inclusive of what our participating contractors need to understand the utilities process to estimating these savings, and then to make our shareholders whole, right, our investors, right? Because, you know, if we're not building, we're not generating revenue. If we're reducing costs to the system, right, inherently, they're paying us less. But engaging in what we've designed, they're called earnings adjustment mechanisms for our company. When we set our energy efficiency targets, they're tied to goals, right? And if we achieve those goals, we're able to earn that return based off the deferral of the building traditional infrastructure, right? So just making sure that, again, you know, I said this before, but equity, right? Equity leads to respect, right? Transparency leads to trust, and then that mutual benefit leads to engagement. And we need that across the board to really promote stakeholder mobilization.
I think for me, it's just not that this is that tangible, but just fostering innovation. I mean, I think, you know, in history, we've seen when populations or groups come together, a lot can get done that beats expectations. And most of the time it does. And so, you know, I think what we've seen is a transition where certainly government has a heavy hand to play in fostering that, but you're seeing the private money start to pour in, and certainly in venture activity, you know, it's beginning to be understood that while socially beneficial, there is also, you know, an economic shift that will, you know, create whole new economies that don't exist. And that plays a big role in the incentivization to transition. So, but tied with that innovation and that ability to access capital is extremely important in order to create the technologies. But then we need across the demonstration sphere, as I mentioned, the ability, and that's where I think, you know, the more governmental support to foster, you know, the bookends of it, the research side where, you know, seedling ideas that could turn into, you know, where they would be applicable to more venture type funding, into actual demonstration projects where those technologies can be proven at scale in real world environments and show the world or the community of whatever, or industry community, I should say, that these technologies work. And then those can be kind of self-fulfilling from a momentum standpoint. So while I do think we're behind, I think, you know, you'll hit sort of critical mass on certain segments where that proliferation will take care of itself, because we'll see the shift to economic viability that will actually incentivize itself to be adopted, whether carbon free or otherwise. It will just be the right choice. So I think that starts, you know, with those seedlings, but there's, you know, items across the value chain that can be supported to make sure that innovation actually reaches the point to where it's implemented.
We have to invent the utility cell phone. I mean, we have to change, right? Going from an older industry to a new industry, like we have to move to that space, right?
Yeah, I over the last year, I've heard energy compared to telecom a lot. I think you might be onto something there. Well, we've bumped up against time here, so I just want to thank you all for participating. Gray, Lora, Shaun, Brian, Angel. You've all been fantastic. And for those of you watching the recording, thanks for watching it. And make sure to check out the NPUC website for all our fun graphics and research and such. Yep. Thanks, everybody. And this has been really great. Happy to have you.
Really appreciate your candor. Really appreciate
Thank you.
your time. And can't wait to continue more of the conversation.
I look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Have a
day.
good day, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks.